Welcome to this instrument tutorial video. This video is going to be about building a synthesizer from the ground up. And for that, I'm using the synth program that I like to use because it's free, number one, because it's modular, number two, and because it's just got so many different options also. This is called VCV Rack. So here is a synth right here. You can see my mouse moving on screen. Here's a synth that I made in this program from scratch using all of the components of a synthesizer. And in this video, we'll talk about what those components are, how to use them, how they work, and how to put them together to create a synthesizer. And there's lots of different videos on YouTube about how to make a synthesizer sound from this particular song or from this particular song. You can go on YouTube and look up tutorials and go on forums and read. It's a lot of fun, and you can learn a lot about how to make synths, how to make interesting sounds on the synth. Anyway, so how this video is being recorded, I'm just using the microphone on this Mac, and the sound of the synth. Oh, let me turn that up a little bit. So the sound of the synth, you can hear it there, is also coming out of the speakers on the Mac and is being recorded again by the microphone on the Mac. So it's very low tech how I'm doing this. I'm just screen recording and capturing the audio from the microphone that is picking up my voice and the speaker, the sound of the synth. Okay, so we can see here, let's just go over the components that we have here and we'll see how each of them work. We'll create a new synth, we'll build one totally from scratch. So first, maybe I should look at this one down here. This is the MIDI to CV converter module. What this module does is it converts MIDI data into voltage. And synthesizers are all about voltage. Voltage controls everything here, and that's what all these little cables are for. They connect all the pieces together. So what this module does, we need it in order to interface with the synth, at least with a keyboard or some external device if we want to play the synth anyway. Otherwise, we could use a sequencer, and there's a sequencer module in here. Where is it? It's right up here, this big one right here. We could use a sequencer module and that would essentially replace this MIDI to CV converter as being the source of our pitch information. Anyway, so yeah, that is how I am getting data, MIDI data from my keyboard to the synth, and it's changing the MIDI data into control voltage. So when I hit a key, you can see these little lights light up right here. You can see the gate is firing over to my ADSR, and it's also re-triggering the ADSR, and the volts per octave, the pitch information is coming up to my oscillators right here. And I've also got other things for the filter cutoff. We'll get to all that. So there's a MIDI to CV converter. Over here is the audio module. This is how I'm getting the audio from the synth out to the speakers. And that's basically what it's doing. You can see it's got a couple cables running up here from my audio chain. Here I've got oscillators. I've got 3 different oscillators in this one, 2 wavetable oscillators, and 1 standard voltage controlled oscillator. That's what VCO stands for, voltage controlled oscillator. And these are just creating sound waves. And on the wavetable oscillators, you can even see the shape the sound wave is. Well, if I just change it to, say, 100, there it changes to a square wave. And if I change it to 1, it's a sine wave. If I change it to 50, it's sort of an in-between kind of thing. If I change it to 75, we get a little bit closer to a saw wave, and over around 25, we'll get something like a triangle. So that's pretty cool. We can actually see the sound wave that it's putting out. So there's the oscillators. Those are creating the sound wave. Here, all of the oscillators are running into this mixer amplifier. This is controlling the volume of the oscillators. So I could see these three cables right here are receiving the outputs from each of the oscillators here, and they are being mixed together into a single output right here. And that's also being controlled by the ADSR envelope. We'll get to that. Next, this is all audio that we're talking about. So the oscillator creates the sound wave. The mixer mixes together the sound waves and combines them into a single signal. And next, we send it to the filter. This can be either a high pass or a low pass filter right down here. I've got it in low pass mode. There's a cutoff knob, and it basically just changes if I play. Oops, well, this is moving really slowly. I'm just going to go down to 1, the very low. You can see it only goes down to about 8 hertz for the cutoff, and you can't even hear it because this Mac can't produce 8 hertz. Or if I send it up to, let's just see if I can get it to 8,000 is the highest. So it'll go to 8,000, and that is obviously much louder because all of the frequencies are being allowed to come through. And I can center that here. It centers on 261.63. And that's dark, rolled off lots of high end, but you could still hear it. Nice warm sound. So there's the filter. Voltage controlled filter, voltage controlled amplifier, voltage controlled oscillators. Next, well, let's skip over here. Here, this is the last component of the audio chain. These are, this is a pair of delays, and I'm using them just to get a stereo widening effect. So it's just a delay. If you just hit the note, you can hear that that it's got a tail, and they're kind of offset with each other, so they're not perfectly lining up with each other. If I turn these off, if I turn the mix down all the way, whoops, that's just the synth. That's just the synth. And then if I reintroduce the delays, it's got a nice long tail and works really well for a pad. Okay, so there's the audio, and the delay is also voltage controlled. We can control any aspect of it that we want to. These 4 knobs here. We'll get to all that later. So that's the audio chain. We have the oscillators creating the sound wave. We mix them together and combine them into a single signal with the amplifier mixer. And then we filter the signal, and we can do high pass or low pass, but we affect the audio frequency range with the filter. And then we send that signal to our delays. It splits back into 2 signals and then sends out to the speakers, or whatever our output is going to be. If it's an interface, if it's a line output, whatever. Okay, now this right here it says ADSR EG. That's attack, decay, sustain, release, ADSR, and EG stands for envelope generator. This is another kind of wave. If you notice, it kind of looks a little bit like these wavetable oscillators right here. You can see the wave there. So an oscillator like this one right here, it's generating this sound wave right here, this triangle wave, and it's always generating that. It never turns off. It is always going. But the ADSR is generating this wave. Obviously, it looks a little bit different than this triangle wave over here. So it is generating this wave, but it will only generate it when we trigger it. And that's one difference, is that the oscillator is always creating the sound wave, and the envelope generator only generates that wave when it is triggered by an external source. Okay, so there's the envelope generator. Another important part is over here, these LFOs. These are, again, wavetable LFOs, so we can see the sound wave that they're creating. These are just like our standard oscillators over here, and that they're creating a wave, and the only difference is that the wave of an LFO is much slower. It's a much lower frequency, and generally typically outside of the audio range. So this oscillator right here, we could see it's generating, let me highlight it right here. This oscillator right here is generating a sound frequency at 261.63 hertz. The audible range is from 20 to 20,000 hertz. So as long as this oscillator is generating a signal somewhere in that range, we will be able to hear the wave as a sound wave. But this LFO right here is generating a sound wave at 1 hertz. And the lowest frequency range that a human can generally hear is 20 hertz. So that is far, far below the audible range. And the effect of that is that we can use it for modulation, basically. This one right here is being 1 hertz. Well, actually, both of these are set to 1 hertz, but I can set it to, what's the maximum on here? Let me see what it goes to. Well, it'll go to 90, so it'll go up into the audio range, actually. Let's see if I go to try and max it out, it'll go to 1024 hertz. But right now I've just got it set to 1 hertz. That's 1 sound wave cycle per second. Okay, so there's all of the components here of this synth. Let's clear all this out. Let's create a brand new synth from the ground up, and let's see how that goes. So we want to, let's see, we want to go up here and we hit File, New. Current patch is unsaved. Yeah, whatever. I've already got this patch saved, and we can see there's a save button right here where we can save each patch that we create. But I've already got this one saved, so I'm going to clear it, and it gives us this bunch of stuff right here. When we create a new patch, we're just going to go ahead and clear all this out because we're going to start from absolute scratch. So the first thing we want to start with, we want to right click, and we're going to bring in our audio module, and there's a couple of different ones. This one right here is probably the one that we'll use. Obviously there's these other ones right here. We'll just do that, and we'll bring it over here to the side. And now let's bring in the MIDI to CV converter. We need these. This is going to get the audio or get the MIDI information from my keyboard. I'm just using the QWERTY keyboard, and it will transform it into voltage that the computer will use, that the program will use to affect the synthesizer. And here I'm just going to select the speakers as the audio output. Now we can start to put in, well, let's just bring in one single voltage controlled oscillator right here. So we need an oscillator again because it's going to give us, actually, why don't I have these down here? I usually like to keep these separated. And you know what, why don't I bring in 2 oscillators just because. We need the oscillator because that is what is going to create the sound wave. We don't have a synthesizer unless we have a sound wave. That's what the oscillator does. Next, well, actually, let's look at these oscillators real quick and see what it's got on here. So we could see down here, these are the outputs. There's a sine wave output, a triangle wave, a saw wave, and a square wave. Well, let me see, let me set this to, let's say, -50. And if I just connect this output straight there, we can hear, there, whoops, we can hear, there's that sound wave. So yes, so this is just creating a sound wave. I can connect that straight to the output, and we can hear that sound wave going. There's a triangle wave. There is the sine wave, and make sure my volume is all the way up. Yes, and that is with the volume at -50. If I bring it up, we can start to see the meters here producing a signal, and that is the level that it is putting out. If I set this to 0, it would obviously be very, very loud, and it would probably be damaging to something. I don't want to risk that. So yeah, so we've got a bunch of different outputs here. Actually, let me reconnect that real quick just to... Here's the frequency knob, which is obviously affecting the frequency of the sound wave. There's a pulse width, which for a square wave is kind of cool. That could be cool for creating some kind of a modulation effect. These little jacks right here are the ways that we can modulate the oscillator. So we can see right here volts per octave. That is our pitch. Well, both of these are pitch modulator inputs. Volts per octave is what allows our keyboard to, and let me go ahead and remove that. Volts per octave is what allows our keyboard to play notes in tune, basically, with the oscillator. So if I look up here, I can see there's a volts per octave output from the MIDI to CV converter. This is a volts per octave input. We can see it right here. It says at 1 volt per octave pitch input. If I connect this with, say, a red cable to here, then I can use my, and let me reconnect this to the output. I'm just using red for audio, so all the red cables will be audio cables. If I turn up my volume a little bit, there it is. So I can affect the pitch now of the oscillator using volts per octave, and that's just me hitting on my keyboard, my QWERTY keyboard, and it's changing the pitch of this oscillator. So let me go ahead and connect both of these volts per octave to this output. Oh, one thing about this MIDI to CV converter I need to say is if I right-click on it, if you right-click on anything in this program, it'll give you options, but I want to go down here and I want to look at polyphony. Right now, this synth is set to monophonic mode, and we can see that right here. That means it will only give us one note at a time, and if we hit more than one note or key on our keyboard, it will still only give us one note output. So we need to, well, if we want to play chords, basically, or if we want to play anything like we normally would on a keyboard synthesizer, we want to have some polyphony to work with. So let me just set 8 channels of polyphony. Now I can have up to 8 notes coming out of this synth. If I connect this oscillator to the output just straight there and go to -50 again, just because it's nice and quiet. Now if I hit 2 notes, we can hear there's 2 notes there. There's 3 notes, 4 notes, and so on and so forth. And those are all sustaining because the keyboard is sending that pitch information and modulating the frequency of these oscillators via volts per octave. Okay, great. Next, that's our oscillators taken care of. Next, we need that mixer module because we've got more than one oscillator. We need to mix them together. We could also, if we only had one monophonic oscillator and we only wanted one note at a time, then we could just, or if we didn't have multiple oscillators to mix together, here's a single VCA, voltage control oscillator. It just doesn't have a mixer, but it does the same thing as this, only this can do it for 4 oscillators, or 4 signals. This can only do it for 1. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to connect our oscillators. Let's see, I'll use saw wave here and connect it to input 2. I'll use a square wave here, connect it to input 1. And now I've got, let me make sure this is down, I've got 2 oscillators together. Let me set that to -50. And we can hear this oscillator is still triggering all those different notes, but we can mix them together now. Right? Sounds really good. And we're gonna tune this in just a second. So we'll actually be able to see how it's working once we get it all together. But we can see that now we've got 2 oscillators and we've got them mixed together, and the output of that is coming from here. These are control voltage inputs for each channel, the audio input for each channel, and the audio output for each channel. Here's the audio output for all channels and the control voltage input for all channels. So what control voltage does on an amplifier, this is controlling our volume, and that's all it does. It just controls the volume, and I've got faders here so I can blend the volume of these together if I want one to be louder than the other, or vice versa. So I can control the volume of things here. If I had a modulation source, I could plug that into one of these inputs, and it would modulate the volume of it based on whatever the source of that modulation is. Okay, so again, we've got our oscillators, we've got our mixer, mixing them together. Next, we need a filter. All right, so we've got a filter right here. Let me drag it down. I'm going to take the output of the audio mixer, and I'm going to send it to the audio input of the filter. And I've got 2 audio outputs here, low pass and high pass filter. So I can send the low pass filter here, and we can hear what that sounds like. If I go back to -50 again, right? So we can hear that. And also the volume is lower because we're cutting off, most of the frequency range with this filter. Right here, if I turn it all the way down, it's only letting 8.556 hertz and lower pass. That's what low pass means. It's letting the low frequencies pass. Set that right back to the middle, and if I go back down to -50, because I don't know how this is going to react, if I go over to high pass allows the high frequencies to pass. And if I bring that down, all of the frequencies above 8.556 hertz are being allowed to pass. All of the frequencies above 8,000 hertz are being allowed to pass there. So it's a different sound, and there's different reasons why you might want to use those if for whatever kind of sound you're going for. Anyway, the filter is a big part of what makes the sound of the synthesizer what it is, because it's actually affecting the frequency range. Different oscillator sound wave, sound waves, triangle, sine, saw, and square. Different sound waves will have different sounds, and we heard that already. But also the filter will affect the sound pretty drastically based on whatever those oscillators are sending out, what kind of square wave. Also on the filter, we've got resonance. And resonance is, well, it's hard to explain, but that's a certain thing. Let me plug in a low pass filter to the output, and let's see, I'll go to minus 40. Bring up the cutoff a little bit. And then let's hear what the resonance sounds like. Basically, there is a frequency that this resonance knob right here is set to emphasize, and when you turn up that knob, it emphasizes that frequency even more. And right now it's set to 0, so when you have it all the way off, it's not emphasizing any frequency. Here's drive, that's kind of like a distortion, and it also adds a little bit of volume. We've got a modulation input for control voltage, modulation input for the frequency, that's the cutoff frequency. For the resonance, that's this knob right here, and for the drive, that knob right there. So we've got control over each of those knobs there. And yeah, so there's our filter. Next, let's go to, well, let's just add in our envelope generator. Now, this is no longer audio that we're working with. This is control voltage. This is modulation source. So I'm going to add in a second envelope generator here. Now I've got 2 of them. What the envelope generator is typically most commonly used for is to trigger. Remember, the envelope generator will only generate this wave once it's triggered, which is triggered elsewhere. It's used to trigger then usually the amplifier and the filter. So let me see, I'm going to go ahead and set these right above here so we can remember what those are connected to. So the envelope output, that's the output of what this wave is right here. I'm going to send that, and I'm going to use a yellow cable to the CV input to modulate the amplifier here. Now, if I connect my audio to the output, and I set it to around minus 30 or so, and my cutoff is right there, there's nothing coming out. And that's because now this amplifier is, the output of it has been interrupted by the envelope generator. This cable right here is interrupting that audio output signal. Now it will only trigger audio when I trigger the envelope generator. And how I do that is with this gate right here. So we can see there's a gate output from our MIDI controller here. I'm going to take a green cable and send it there to the gate input. Now, MIDI is converting to control voltage to give us the pitch of our oscillators, and it is giving us the trigger for our envelope generator, which will allow sound to pass, and that sound will follow this wave right here. And that will output here to our filter and out to the output. So if I hit a key, there it is, you could see it. Look right here. It's very quiet. And if I hold it, you can hear it there. So let me bring this output up. Well, actually, let me just bring the filter cutoff all the way open. Now we can hear that the audio is being output. And it is only being output when I trigger the envelope generator. That trigger is coming from the gate source, which is my MIDI controller. So I can play a chord now. Like that. And I can play chords. It's harder to play chords on a QWERTY keyboard, but you get the idea. I can play chords now, and those two things are happening. I'm controlling the pitch of my oscillators, and I'm controlling the volume of my amplifier. Now this other envelope generator, I'm going to also use a yellow cable to connect it down here to, and we can connect it to anything that we want to actually, but the most common thing for it to be used for is for the frequency, the cutoff frequency here. And again, the wave that will follow will be according to this wave right here, and I change that wave by adjusting these sliders here. Again, that's the attack, the decay, the sustain, and the release. So yeah, so the envelope generator is how we get our sound, and actually this isn't modulating anything at all. If I set this to the maximum, allow the maximum amount of frequency, and if I turn it all the way off, well, actually it doesn't do anything. And if I set it to maximum, oh, I'm not triggering it. Right, so we need to trigger it. Let's use our green gate cable. I'm using green just to keep things color coordinated. Now we can see that that is being triggered. And if I turn this all the way down now we can hear the envelope generator here. This sound wave is affecting the cutoff frequency knob here. And if I remove that envelope generator, now it's not doing anything because the cutoff frequency is all the way down. Now the frequency cutoff is not being modulated at all. So I'm going to reconnect that. And I've got my oscillators. Again, review, oscillators are being mixed together. The pitch of those oscillators is being controlled by the volts per octave input or output from my MIDI controller. And the amplifier, the volume of the amplifier is being modulated by this envelope generator, which is being triggered by the gate. And my filter is being modulated. The cutoff frequency knob of my filter is being modulated by this envelope generator, which is also getting that same gate signal. And the audio is passing from the oscillators to the mixer to the filter to the output. Cool. Alrighty. And actually, I just realized something. My volts per octave cables right here are not actually sending audio from the MIDI controller. I want to make sure that that's clear. The audio starts at the oscillators right here. The volts per octave is a control voltage. It's not audio. Okay, great. So this is a basic little synth now we've got. And I can play little chords on my QWERTY keyboard or on an actual piano keyboard. Right. So at this point, we can start to mess around with things. We can start to affect our oscillators maybe. Let's play around with that. There we go. So now I've got these oscillators tuned in an octave. And I can tune them in a different interval. Let's see, I'm going to change the sustain of my filter so that the notes will sustain longer so I can hear the note a little bit better. You can just play around with it and find a sound that you like. Sounds like a very out of tune synthesizer there. Almost got it. There we go. That's pretty close. It's a little bit easier to do with this with a keyboard and mouse. I'm using the trackpad on this Mac right now, so it's a little bit finicky. But I can tune these oscillators now to each other. And I can do different things. I can maybe affect the pulse width. Maybe there. Let me turn this up a little bit. I'm going to minus 20. See how that sounds? That's a little bit better. If I wanted to, actually, why don't I do this? I'm going to take these and move them over here a little bit. I'm going to bring in, oops, not an LFO. I don't want that yet. I'm going to bring in another oscillator. So now I've got 3 oscillators working together. And actually, let me just keep those separated there. I've got 3 oscillators. You know what? Why don't I go all the way and keep this nice and organized visually here so we can see exactly what's going on with this synth. Great. Awesome. Okay. Let's take another saw wave here and send it to the input here. Now it's in, and I can play a note. And maybe I can get a sub-octave. Oops, I forgot. I'm not modulating the pitch of that here. Yeah, there we go. Now, let's get a sub-octave. There we go. So I've got a sub-octave here, I've got my main pitch here, and I've got a higher octave here. I could maybe set this one here too. Something like that. Very kind of brassy sound there. Maybe if I don't like that sound wave, I can change it to a triangle. Kind of gives it a kind of a fluty kind of a sound. Maybe I want to adjust the volume of these together. Like that. Yeah, and I'm just playing around with sound creation at this point. I'm just going to, for the sake of the simplicity, I'm just going to go ahead and set these all back to unity. So they are all creating the same exact pitch as each other. All right, now our next modulation source. Well, actually, let me not get ahead of myself. I'm going to go to our final audio portion of the audio signal. So these are those delays. Now, this synth sounds fine like it is. I could, depending on what I wanted it to do, I could create a synth pad. I'd probably lower the filter cutoff quite a ways. You know what? Why don't I just do that? So, oops, volume minus 20, thereabouts. So if I want a synth pad, we'll probably want a pretty warm, dark sound. And let's see, we probably want this frequency cutoff. Maybe we want a slower attack on that, and maybe a quick release, a little bit shorter decay, a longer sustain maybe. Maybe we go with a longer release. Maybe we add a little bit of decay in there. This is the control voltage, the maximum voltage that will be accepted basically by the cutoff filter. If I set that to 50, it will have a less of an effect. So we can hear that it stays really dark. If I raise the cutoff, then this is the frequency that this wave will start at basically. So this beginning of the wave right here will start at, let's set it to 100 hertz, just for the sake of. just for the sake of a round number. Okay, so this is a decent pad sound. And I can play my chords nice and warm. I'm not going to get, too in the way of the mix. But it's kind of lacking context, I'll say. So what these delays are here for is to give us that context. So I want to send the low pass filter here into both of these delays, and I'm going to send the mix output, although I could use the wet output right here. I'm going to send this mix output to both sides here. This is going to give me stereo effectively is what I'm going to be able to achieve with this. Now, if I hit a note, we can hear that there's delay there. If I bring the frequency cutoff a little bit higher, right, there's our delay. This is going to give us, it's going to give us a tail to the note so that we can transition between chords nice and smoothly. It's going to make the chords kind of blend and mesh with each other. It's going to create lots of movement and all these things that we really want out of a good synth pad sound. And if I play, you can hear how those chords blend into each other, and they're blending into each other because the delay is lengthening the tail. It's delaying and repeating. I would really love it if VCV Rack had a reverb module built in, but as far as I know, there isn't one built in. I imagine that would be a little bit more difficult than just a simple delay like this. But anyway, on our delay, we've got right here a time control. That's how much time is in between each of the repeats. Feedback, how many repeats are there going to be. Tone, that's the filter basically for the repeats. How dark or how bright are the repeats going to be. And mix, this is why I chose the mix output here. It's mixing the sound of the synthesizer here, just the plain dry sound of the synth with the sound of the delay. It's mixing them together and sending them to this output right here. If I selected the wet output, that would only give me the sound of the delay coming through. And I want the sound of the dry signal coming through so I can play a little bit easier. It's a little bit easier to play that way for more accuracy and the rhythm of it. Okay, so the last piece of the puzzle. This is great. This is a good decent. If I bring the cutoff back down again, that's a nice synth pad with movement. It's got movement coming from the filter envelope, and it's got a nice character to it. And it's got a little bit of a tail here with the delays, but it doesn't have a stereo kind of width that I really want. So I'm going to add another module here. And if you remember, LFO, the low frequency oscillator, this is creating a sound wave just like our voltage control oscillator, but it is so slow that we can't actually hear it as a pitch, as a sound wave, but we can use it to modulate another thing. You know, if I replaced one of my envelope generators with, well, why don't I just do it? Why don't I replace both of them? So I'm gonna whoops. Well, there you can hear it. Now, the pair of LFOs here are modulating the amplifier volume and the frequency cutoff. I could do things that way, but you can see how this is just creating a sound wave, and it's just creating it just like this does, but this doesn't need to be triggered. like the envelope generator does. This is creating a sound wave. Well, it's creating a wave, and it's creating it constantly. So what that's useful for, if I take the sine wave output here, let's take the blue one and send it to the time knob down here. And I'm going to leave this CV at 0, so it is not being modulated at all. Now if I raise the time CV here, you can hear what happens there. It's pretty drastic. So this is where controlling your control voltage is a big deal. If I set this too high, it has that kind of... So I want that to be a lot more subtle. I want a subtle modulation effect. So where I usually set this is 0.1%. And that is all I need. Now that is much more subtle, much more musical, because it's not changing the pitch so drastically. Essentially, what that's doing is turning this knob up and down. And this knob is a frequency knob, kind of like this frequency knob right here. If I set this frequency knob higher, it will, well, faster is this way actually. It basically is kind of creating a wave, just like this is creating a wave, and it will create it at a certain frequency. That's what it is. So if I turn this knob, it changes the frequency of that wave, the time, and it changes the frequency slightly, and that's the kind of modulation that I want, is a subtle pitch modulation. Very subtle. And actually that's still a little bit too much. Maybe I should go down to 0.05. It's very subtle, but if you heard this in stereo on a set of actual stereo monitors, then you would hear that it's super wide, it's super lush and full and rich, and it just creates this huge sound. If I take away that modulation, if I set that time CV back to 0, it's still got the pad sound, but it's straight mono. There's no width, there's no bigness, there's no nothing to it. But if I add that just 0.05% of the voltage that this is sending to me, then I've got that nice, huge, wide stereo delay sound. And this is a really effective, if I set my frequency, I set it all the way down at the bottom, this is a huge, super effective synth pad. And that's pretty dark, right? But a lot of times that's all we want our synth pad to do, is to just be as far back in the background as possible, but to take up that stereo space. If I set that up a little bit higher, it can be a little bit more audible, a little bit more effective. And I can do different things to it. I can take another output from this LFO, and let's see, let's see. Well, let me affect the volume of this second input on our mixer, this second oscillator right here. So now I'm effectively modulating with this LFO the pitch of this delay and the volume of this oscillator right here which is connected to this fader. You can see it's kind of blinking there. So here's what that sounds like. Here's what that sounds like. Kind of comes in and out a little bit. And if I set that a little bit faster, you can hear kind of a warbling effect there. I've got this second oscillator right here. Why don't I use that for this? Let me do the saw wave. Why not? Or the square wave. Square wave is good for modulating volume, I think. It's very rhythmic. So we can hear how actually rhythmic the synthesizer can be, how effective it can be, and if we want that kind of pulsing from this oscillator on this oscillator, from this LFO to this oscillator, if I want that to be in time with the song, I have to change the frequency knob to match the to match the BPM of the song. Let's see if I go to 10 here. That's pretty cool. If I go to 5, remember this is the LFO that's modulating the volume of this oscillator right here. And this wave right here is nothing different than this square wave right here. The only difference is the frequency of it. This is 261.63 cycles per second. This is 5 cycles per second. Much, much slower. So if I go to 2, that's pretty good. Yeah, somewhere between 2 and 5 is decent, I think. Decent sounding anyway. And it depends on the song, depends on how I want my synth pad to fit in, and how prominent I want it to be, basically. Yeah. Okay, that's how to build a synthesizer. The possibilities are endless with something like this. There are so many things here that we can play with to do different things. I haven't even talked about sequencers. You know, if I bring a sequencer in here, and well, if you have a sequencer, then you probably need a quantizer as well. I'm just kind of going off on a tangent here. Let me see, what cable do I want to use for this? I'll use a yellow one. Why not? You know, I've got a purple cable coming from my volts per octave pitch information here. This is also going to be pitch information. I'll use a purple cable. That's just one way that I like to be, one way that I like to be very organized with how I work in this program. Now let me come off over here and have another oscillator here. Let me get a wavetable oscillator, and I'm going to send the output of this sequencer and quantizer to the volts per octave input here. I'm going to send the audio of this wavetable to my mixer over here, and I'm going to go ahead and turn down these other 3 oscillators right here. So the only oscillator I'm hearing is this wavetable oscillator right here. But the difference is the pitch information of this oscillator is coming from this sequencer through this quantizer, which is going to help me tune the notes basically. And it's not coming from a piano keyboard. So if I take this and I start turning these knobs here, you can see it's starting to give me different notes here. This is a piano keyboard. Let me tune this to the key of C major, so it's only going to give me the white keys right here. But I'm just going to create a random, totally random sequence right here, and I'll set the tempo, well, I'll set it to 100 beats per minute. And that's this sequence right here. Sounds pretty good. Totally random. But this is totally getting into the ambient kind of territory. Let me turn off our delays. All right, great sequence. Actually, that sounds really good right there. Yeah. So much fun that you can have with this program, which is VCV Rack. Search that on the internet, you'll find it. And let me get rid of these extra oscillators right here and reconnect my envelopes here. And now I've got my synth pad back. Here it is. And yeah, it's being modulated there again. Let me set that a little bit lower. Yeah. So much that can be done with this program. So much creativity that you can have as a synthesizer player in a worship band. This is the kind of thing that that you get into when you're doing it. But hopefully you can see how to create a synthesizer from this video, how to do it in this program specifically, but this applies to any synthesizer basically, and especially to modular synthesizers. Modular synthesizers are great because they have all of this capability that we see here. All of these modules have all these different inputs and outputs, and we can use those in innumerable ways. So much creativity, so much possibility for sound creation, and that's what I love about it. One thing before I forget, I wanted to share how to save and recall presets using this program, VCV Rack. Just like saving any other file in any other program, file, save as, and I'm going to call this synth tutorial pad right here because it's saved to my desktop. Save. That's all there is to it. If I want to recall it, you can see right here. Open recent. You can see I've got a couple of different presets that I've had here before. Here's the one that I just made. So here's another preset. This is the one from the start of this video. And now that I've got this other one saved, the synth tutorial pad, right back to it. Super easy to use this program, and I'm going to try to link this exact preset right here, the synth tutorial pad. I'm going to try and include that in the description below this video, so you'll be able to download this patch, this pad, and you'll be able to just play with it, learn about how to make your own synth and modify and mess around with it. Anyway, there we go.